What's up, peoples? It is EK, and we have a smoker here for you tonight at the Devy Dose. I have two very special friends on, two guys that I've always looked up to as data analysts and as, rock solid students of the Dynasty and the draft game. In the top right corner, we have my friend Jake Estes at Dynasty
Estes.
Jake. Estes?
Yes, sir. Everyone butchers it. You're good.
Well, it's tough. I only read it. I don't hear your name pronounced.
Well, it's funny because I either get Estes or Estes. I'm like, I'm not Spanish, and it's not Texas.
I get the Cortez too, man. They don't think I'm Spanish. I'm German, man.
They think it's Estes. So,
Jake, you got anything you want to plug? I know a lot of your work's on Dynasty Nerds. You got anything else going on you want people to go to?
Yeah. So, I've been slacking on Dynasty Nerds this year, but that is a company that I enjoy being affiliated with. So make sure you guys are checking out the work that we're doing over there. Additionally, I just got my rookie rankings published, selling those for $20. But if you check out the hit rates and some of the stuff I've been doing, I think you'll find that it's very much worth the money. I don't do it for the money. It's just a way. I was getting sniped so much every year by my league mates. I'm like, dude, if you're going to snipe me, at least pay me first. And then I can talk about it. So I really enjoy talking about it. So, but yeah, I got most of my stuff behind a paywall this year. But you can find that on my Twitter at Dynasty_Jake. It's the website linked. You can message me on Twitter if you want to know more or whatever. But always happy to talk about anything. So, yeah.
Yeah, money well spent, and Jake's always been a great guy to talk to about data scouting, Dynasty rookie ranks, all of that. And then on the bottom, certainly not the least, my friend David at DavidZack16, proprietor of the Z Score, general all-around Dynasty superstar. David, you got anything to plug?
Well, I don't know about superstar, but yeah, like you said, the Z Score is coming out soon, right after the draft. I hope to have that article finished up. I'll be doing projections for 32 teams again, as well as best ball dynasty redraft, pretty much. I'm all things NFL and fantasy all the time, so that's what I roll with. And to your point, shout out to the Dynasty Nerds guy. We all contribute there to some extent, and they're just a great crew, and they treat people right. And I love what they do.
Yeah, I can't speak highly enough about the Nerds. I love the pod. I love the crew they put together there. That subscription is well worth every dollar that goes into it, just for the film room alone. But you also get rankings from guys like David, Jake, me, the guys on the pod, and the Dynasty GM tool itself is phenomenal as well. All right, guys, let's get into the meat and potatoes here. So we're here tonight. We got a data scouting roundtable. This is something I wanted to put together for some time now, and really just get a couple of sharp minds on. Let's kick the ideas around. Let's talk building models. Let's talk philosophy. Let's talk processes. And I think first, I just wanted to know kind of what pulled you guys into data scouting as a way of looking at Dynasty football and football in general. You want to lead off, Jake?
Yeah, sure. So it's funny. You're talking about being a man of extremes, and this is an example of it. So I got my MBA at the University of Kentucky, and we were studying. I was in one of my stats classes, and we were studying actually fantasy basketball, and we were doing regression analysis on it. And I'm like, oh man, like if I did this to fantasy football, I think I could probably create something I like. And really, what it came down to, my first year of Dynasty, I had a really good team, but they were old. And I was like, man, I know how to draft these old guys, but I don't know what the hell I'm doing for college. So I really started doing this, spending probably around 100, 200 hours building these models so that I could win my league is really why I did it. And then after the first year, it was a pretty good model. And then the second year I refined it, and I was really impressed. And so now that's just something I'm doing every year. I've gotten a lot of really good feedback on it. So here we are, still doing it, and it's really cool. It's been a good tool to help me win, and really for value in the sense of with regression analysis, I've been able to identify certain players that are flying under the radar. It's when you have players that are flying under the radar, you can capture that value. So like for me, like last year, it was like Rashad White and Chigoziem Okonkwo, right? So people weren't even drafting Chigoziem. And then I'm a Titans fan, so they think that it was just me being a Titans fan. I'm like, no, like this dude's my number 2 tight end. and I got them for free in all my leagues, right? So it's working. It's a really cool tool, and I'll get into the details of it later if we want to delve in. It's a long conversation trying to explain exactly what it is. People hear regression, they think like I'm trying to project somebody to regress, and that is not the case. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
Yeah, it's a good point. We should probably define some of the terminology.
I can do again. It takes a couple minutes to explain.
Yeah. David, how about you? What's your origin story as the data analyst?
That sounds kind of similar. I had tracked a lot of data to beat my league mates, like you were saying, and then I remember consuming content, and I don't know who it was. It was someone on ESPN or something, and I'm like, just like everyone out there, like, what's this guy know? I can do better than that. Right. So I was like, well, let's see if I can. And then I really got into the weeds of it there. Like I had always tracked some stuff with my league mates, and like age and fantasy points is where it started, pretty much is all it was for Dynasty. And now it's expanded into this 20-page Google Sheets thing that has 100 different models feeding into the end result and stuff like that. And yeah, like I really liked your point about identifying values, because that's been the biggest edge for me as well. Like I was there for Antonio Gibson and Ramondre Stevenson and those guys, and they really popped in my models, and no one was on them. And I like to go to war on Twitter with people who down my guys and stuff like that. And you'll see me out there defending Quentin Johnston out here lately. But there really is an edge to find. So I know a lot of people try to consume as much as possible, which is also good because you learn there. But if someone can't prove to me why a stat matters, like Johnson's drops, for example, whereas I think EK actually disproved that with a study he did not too long ago. So if they can't prove to me why it matters, like all they're spewing out is noise, and that's what a lot of stuff is out there. It's noise, it's narratives, and it doesn't truly matter. If you build your own database, you'll see what does matter and what stats you should listen to and what you should ignore. And that's almost more valuable than even building a model, is knowing what to listen to and what to ignore. So
yeah, and I want to add to that. I think that's a really good point, because I'll be scrolling through Twitter and I see somebody who's like, oh, this guy's 5th in targets and 25th in yards after the catch or yards after that. I'm like, but does that correlate to more fantasy points? But people don't understand that they need to consume, like they think when I start talking about yards per team attempts, that's just some random stat. I'm like, no, like this is a highly correlated stat, at least in my models.
Oh yeah, it's a holy grail stat right there.
And it's like this is what you should care about, not yards per reception or how many yards you're averaging on air yards. Yeah, there's just a whole bunch of stats, and people have a tendency to, one, advertise the wrong ones, and two, people consume those, assuming that there's some type of correlation.
Right. And there might be some, but it's just minute compared to
it's less. Yeah.
Right.
Good point.
Yeah. So I guess my next keynote here was, I guess, what's the general philosophy with which you approach data scouting? Like the general idea, your overarching theme. Like what are you looking for in your data scouting? I think you got into that a little bit already, but you want to elaborate on it at all, Jake?
Yeah, sure. So what I'm looking for specifically is I compare what my model, how it ranks all of the class, and I compare it to ADP, right? And so when I see a good example, I don't want to give too many details out, but essentially Bijan Robinson's everybody's number one, right? And that's consensus. It is as well in my model. But if it wasn't, I had the first pick and I'm not as high on Bijan Robinson, I'd be like, okay, let me trade out this pick because I know I can get my guy later. So I can get my guy plus for somebody that somebody else values higher. So like Kenneth Walker was a good example. I had Rashad White over Kenneth Walker, and that was not consensus last year. People hated it, right? But when I'm at 107 and Kenneth Walker's on the board, instead of drafting Rashad White, because that's not smart in the sense of value, right? So what I'm doing is I'm trading back, I'm capturing value by getting Rashad White plus for Kenneth Walker. So that's really what I'm looking for. I'll look for value when I do this. Yeah,
that's awesome. How about you, David? Any different approach for you?
Yeah, I'm always scouring for any metric that carries significant weight. So metrics that matter is how I like to look at it. And for the longest time, I didn't have film grades. So like Dynasty Nerds with the Nerds score or, NFL.com's Airlines grades. So that's one category now, and that carries pretty good weight. Draft capital, everyone's got that in there. and then breaking down production metrics, athleticism, physical metrics, all that stuff. So if I can't make it significant in the model, or if you run multiple linear regression and you get a crazy p-value or something like that, and in regards to other metrics, then I don't want it in my model. I'm always fine tuning and trying to improve it every year. So any model that stays static is dead, in my opinion. So you're always trying to improve and, blind check against results that you can exclude on purpose just to see if they matter and see if it's predictive instead of just solely descriptive. And like you said, in your soul sheet, overfitting the data sometimes. So a lot of people tend to do that starting out right away. Yeah. And it's pretty dangerous. It's hard to see when you're starting out. You don't know what you're looking at. So that's kind of how I attack things. I want everything that matters most, and I want to put it all together in a meaningful way with appropriate weights, not overweighing anything. So, or trying to at least.
So I guess, and then let's use wide receiver. That's kind of what I think probably you hear about the most, and I think a lot of us have the best validity for our wide receiver models, or at least I hear that from other people at times. So, and I guess it's probably a good time to start off some definitions like we talk about. So when you guys talk about a model, you're generally talking about a linear regression model. Is that right for both of you, or do you guys use different modeling?
I have some quadratic formulas thrown in, but it's 98% linear.
Yeah. How about you, David?
I would say about 60 to 70% is linear, and then I do data binning where I kind of do little linear models within that, so it's kind of zigzaggy throughout there, so to speak, but depending on the bin you're in, because middle range might be flatter and the extreme ends might tail up, so like an S curve or something like that. So it just depends what the data is. I always like to chart the data so you can see it. Like it's actually really easy to see when you chart all the dots on something, if it's pure linear or if it's something else that you need to do it too. So that's my first step in everything. I like to chart it, because if I can see it, it instantly makes sense and you know what to do with it. So.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Jake, you want to give the 15-second definition of a linear regression? Is that...
Yeah, so I'll try and give us a quick synopsis. It's hard to do, but basically what we're doing here when we're doing these data analytics is we're measuring two different things or a few different things and comparing it to a result. So the result here that we're trying to predict is fantasy points, right? And so what we do is we look at what NFL players average throughout their career, how many fantasy points. At least this is how I do it. There's different ways to do it, and then I compare that to their college data. And I say, okay, these guys that were most successful in the NFL as far as fantasy points goes, the guys that are scoring the most points, what did they all have in common? And I do that for every position. And when you measure that, it actually tells you that there are predictive college metrics, college stats that can help us understand which players are going to be good fantasy players. And so that's kind of the gist of it. Does that make sense?
It sounds great to me.
But yeah.
Yeah. Anything to add on linear regression, David, or is that?
No, you put it well. I'll just add that. Yeah, it's all to NFL points per game for me. Over a certain year span. So I use 3 years. The first 3 years for running backs, years 2 through 4 for wide receivers, because it sometimes takes them a little longer to hit their stride in the NFL. But yeah, any database that you have should have a correlation on top, in my opinion. So I think Peter Howard has that in his model in some of them, and I have it on mine. The very top row is correlation, and then you got all your categories. So you just scroll through, you kind of see what matters, and can instantly debug 40 times for wide receivers or something like that just by looking at that top bar.
That's funny. I've never heard that before, but I did that this year on my models just to.
Oh, you did?
To throw it all up there and just be like, well, what should I be interested in? You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's a really high correlation, then maybe I should do more work on it and start running some p-tests and stuff.
Right. So yeah, that's the first step, is you see if it matters, and then you can start modeling it together with other things and adjusting stuff for conference or what have you, and all that beautiful stuff that mixes together.
That I spend endless hours at night tweaking. All right, cool. So let's launch into wide receiver model. So I guess my first question is, where do we start? And I think you guys kind of answered that, right? Jake did pretty succinctly. We're going to look at points per game. And I think you use career points per game, Jake, rather than...
Yeah, so I do career, actually. So I know that's not the standard. That's just the way I've done it. And it's rendered pretty solid results, so I'll continue to do so.
Yeah.
until I see.
I didn't find a huge difference between career and years 1 to 3. I thought they tracked pretty similarly.
Yeah.
Some variance, but similar enough. Great. And then, so where did you start finding inputs? You found stuff that correlated well. How do you investigate inputs? What inputs were interesting to you for wide receiver?
So shout out to our guy, Dave Wright, FF Spaceman on Twitter. He has a massive database. I don't know if he builds it or if he purchases it and then
I think he builds that by hand.
I think so too. And so I buy his data, and he's got literally around 1,000 different stats. So you're looking at career best, career last, career average for every single wildly obscure stat, yards per team pass attempt, yards per team attempt, all kinds of crazy stuff. So I literally measure every single one of those in my model. And, by the end, you get probably 6 to 7 that are correlated. But then when you measure for covariance, then you end up with 2 or 3. So that's how mine's down to, I think, 3. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and when you say measure, you're looking for best fit, right? Like best R squared from the variance in the stat.
So what I'm specifically looking at is called the p-value, and I'm pretty sure you guys know what that is. But it tells us, so it's like whether you can reject or accept a null hypothesis.
Yeah, the significance value, right?
That's the nerdy version. But basically, it just tells us, it gives us a threshold that says this matters or doesn't matter. And so threshold's super high in the sense of you have to really fit in that window to be considered significant. And so I measure all these stats. I figure out which ones are significant, and then I measure at the end to make sure that I'm not really measuring the same thing twice, which is what covariance is. You don't want to weight something twice in your model that is correlated, because then it's you're inappropriately weighting it. You're giving something twice the value that it should.
Yeah. Right. David, anything to add or build on those thoughts?
You said you only use 3 models or 3 variables in your wide receiver model?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got it down to 3.
So it's got to be like what, draft capital and yards per team pass attempt and
no, it's draft capital, career average, receptions per team pass attempt, and then declare year.
Okay, nice.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
David Zacharysen's is really simple too. A lot of his models are 4 variables, 3 variables, pretty clean. So David, I take it that yours is not that simple.
This all sounds very very nice to manage rather than going through all these equations and double checking that they're right and all that. But
I mean, this is all still math and equations, but it's not.
Right.
I mean, it's all in Excel, so it's done automatically. I just have to enter the formula and drag down,
Sure.
Yeah.
So in mine, I got a lot of inputs going on. So I have a lot of similar ones that we've discussed already. Early declare, draft capital, yards per team pass attempt. I use a college career production metric, and I adjust that for conference. Like Sports Reference has a SRS and SOS measure for each team.
I've seen that. I used to have it, pulled it.
Oh, it's so good. It makes any single metric you apply it to, it'll make it stronger in my experience. So
as a modifier you can use it like a coefficient for the metric.
Right. So depending on what the metric is and how it blends in together, it's either a coefficient or kind of a scaling to an average. So like I think in one I use the player's SRS over the average SRS, and then I square root it and then apply it to the metric that I'm using. So that happens in a lot of cases. Like you said, you don't want to use it too much. Otherwise you're just measuring the same thing over again.
It's really interesting hearing this, because it's just there's so many different ways to do it. Even though we're doing the same process, you can put your own spin on it, and which exactly.
Oh yeah. Right. So yeah, that's one. And then those efficiency metrics like market share for a team and then yards per route run I use as well for final season. I like splitting up final season and career average, because I found a lot more signal in final season, and career average I think it's the best one to use, but I get a little added signal by using that final season bump. And I use efficiency for final season, whereas you use kind of overall production per game for the career one. So I think I'm not overfitting too much. At least my MLR, multiple linear regression analysis, doesn't think so. So I'm going with that trend. And then I often blend a lot of models together. So I'll measure it one way with the MLR model, and then I'll do my own model that I kind of see how much weight they each have, and then I'll build it together and try and see if I can get my correlation up as high as the one that the model built. And then I'll blend them together so that a lot of times it can catch mistakes in the models or something like that, and then it evens them out and then gives me the best output I've found. So I do that with film grades too. I use the Nerds score, NFL, and Scouts Inc., and I blend them all together, and then that gives me an output there. Same with athleticism. There's a Harvard Combine metric, then there's ones that I've come up with, blend them together, gives me the best output. So
you're using like film grade goes into your model as an input, essentially.
Yep. So like Jake said, you just do a simple linear regression for that one. Most of the time, that's all it is. The nerd score, I'm actually thinking about doing something different because they start so high on their numbers that I think it's going to be better to use a upwards tail at the end of some kind of equation for there. So I'm
normalization formula.
What's that?
Like a normalization formula.
Yeah, something like that. Just to see if I can get it a little more sticky with it, because draft capital, you got to use that, right? So, yeah, I've been playing with that, but you got to reevaluate every year and make sure you're measuring the right things and doing it the right way, and that it's predictive and not overly descriptive. And by that I mean descriptive is always looking backwards. Predictive means that it's going to maintain its validity over multiple years, or blind test it against taking out any year in that data, and then you test against it and see if the correlation is just as high, and if it doesn't get hurt if you change it around by doing that, and then you kind of reevaluate with each class. So that's kind of how I polish it up, so to speak.
So I think there's an interesting question there about the sample sizing and how many years you guys like to have in your data set as well, because I found that can change what we're looking at a lot. Jake, how many years are you using for your data set here?
So this is a great question, because I used to be under the premise that this league is ever changing and that I want my model to understand. And so I was using, I think the first year I did basically I wanted a big enough sample size, right? So if I went back 5 years, how many receivers did they give me? 250, 300, whatever. Because I only want to measure guys that are touching the field. That's all I care about. If you're not touching the field, you didn't have an opportunity to perform, in my opinion. So that's what I do. But I actually changed it last year, and I said, well, let's go ahead and just give these bigger sample sizes. So I went all the way back to 2003, I think, for each position, and that's what sample size I'm using. But again, there's a threshold, so it's not all players since 2003. It's all players that reach a threshold, like 50 carries or 50 passes per season.
In college, you're saying?
In college, yes.
Yeah.
No.
Or similar.
No, in the NFL.
Oh, okay. All right.
If you didn't get the opportunity to perform in the NFL, I can't necessarily say your college data is the reason you didn't. Whenever there's players like Tom Brady, who his metrics in college were dog shit, right? But then when you get in the NFL, they're insane. He had an opportunity. Not everybody gets that opportunity. So you have to reach a minimum threshold of pass attempts in the NFL before I'll consider your points per game.
Got it. David, how does that track with your process?
I do it a little differently. I kind of want the tail ends, at least, of highly drafted players, but I kind of apply a similar concept, I guess, in a different way. I only include players drafted roughly round 1 through 4 or 1 through 5, because when I had round 6, 7, and undrafted in there is where I kind of found the cutoff. It just created a lot of bad modeling, so to speak, for the higher end hits that those are the ones we care about most, right? Like we want to hit on our first round and second round picks more than we want to hit on most of our 6th round picks, because they're so rare to hit unless you find an Antonio Brown or a Tom Brady, like you said. So my even if I did include them all, I was looking back, looking at Chris Carson too and some of those guys, and it still doesn't highlight them that much because the rest of their metrics are so bad that in the grand scheme of a model, it still drags them down so far that it's not going to pop. I'll still use these same metrics to look for guys that pop out like that. And that's another point that we'll get to eventually on things we look for breakout and sleepers. But yeah, that's kind of how I approach it anyway. I don't, the extra noise kind of bugs me of the 6th, 7th, and undrafted guys. And if you're looking to find those, I would suggest going to the film, not to me, for those late round sleepers or Jake or you guys, right?
I want to add something to that because I have an approach that I like to do where I ignore draft capital. So say everybody got the exact same draft capital. I want to see which players would pop. So sometimes you get guys that are going to the 6th, 7th round that if they had earlier draft capital, according to my model, it'd be really good. So sometimes those are guys that I end up targeting in the 4th and 5th rounds of these rookie drafts. Guys that I'm like, man, he was productive, but the NFL didn't give him a draft cap. So what happens when he gets those opportunities? Maybe nothing, but
good old Seth Williams. Remember that popping in the
so high on Seth.
No, I remember seeing that before. So that's where I'm at right now, right? I just have mock draft capital, but I typically ignore that for now until the draft. And then, yeah, you see guys that pop like that. And it's kind of funny thinking about them.
There wasn't really a lot this year for me that I was like, damn, if this guy gets draft cap, well, there's one specifically, but I'm not going to. Well, I'm pretty sure you guys know what I'm talking about. One is just insane production, but his draft cap's going to be most likely.
Yeah, I do something similar to you with that too, Jake. I'll keep 2 columns up when I'm looking at it, and one's before draft capital adjustment.
Yeah.
I do the same thing for my film grades too, because
I think it's a fun exercise.
Yeah, it helps remove bias, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, that's a great way of targeting, kind of like we're talking about, like some sleepers too. Like the guys, like if you were great in my model, but you got crushed by draft capital, like that's the kind of guy I'm probably going to look at in rounds 4 and 5. All right, so what about testing? Like, how do you guys go about testing? I think you kind of got into that a little bit. So you've run your regression and then you back test with past years. Either way, you want to talk about the process for that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a complex process for me. When I run these regression models, I get coefficients or I get numbers that are assigned, and there's a weight to each metric, right? So, like early declare really matters in my model. So if you're not an early declare and you didn't produce, lost my train of thought here. What the hell did you ask? I'm not eating a lot of food, guys.
So back testing the model, like how back testing?
So what I do is I just look at a couple previous years and I apply those metrics and I say, okay, so if we use this model to prior years, how accurate is it? For me, and anybody who says differently, I'm gonna call them a liar. You're never gonna get a perfect model, but you should get a general, like your top 5 is generally gonna be your top 5 regardless. Your top 5 in your model should be close to what the generally projected top 5 are, at least in my experience. And if you're not, then it's like, man, someone's either being really undervalued or your metrics might be a little off.
So continuing that on, so how'd you handle Devontae Smith in your model? Just out of curiosity.
No. So that's a great example. Devontae, I think he scored around wide receiver 8. Now, granted, my first model wasn't as good as it is now. So this is I'm using the same model I used last year. I know you're talking about fitting, but I really like the way it worked, and I'm going to let it ride again, see if it does the same thing. And eventually I'll have to adjust if it's no longer being predictive, right? But I don't want to get into the habit of what I call overfitting to try and adjust every single year if it's working. So that's personally my approach. But yeah, Devontae, he made me nervous as hell just because he was so skinny, and obviously he was really good at Alabama, but it's like, I don't know. Why didn't he come out as a junior? Because generally they do. But I think an even better example, Olave was a senior declare, right?
Yep.
Olave is a senior declare who could have came out and been a first-round pick as a junior. So to me, that's about as big of an exception as you get. It's like, man, I probably should give him early declare, even though he didn't, because of the fact that he was projected 16th, 17th overall his junior year, but chose to go back. So I didn't end up doing that. But in hindsight, I think in the future, when I have a player that's like projected to do that and then goes back to school, assuming no setbacks, I'll probably roll with you, giving him that early declare.
Well, that's a fair point.
Great question, though.
It's hard to measure all those guys who are, could have gone their junior year but
Plus,
didn't.
COVID years really messed a lot of things up.
Yeah, that's just a nightmare for us data heads, right?
Yeah.
That's not fun. But
So do you have early declare as a primary component of your wide receiver model, David?
yep, or it's in there too, but a lot of that gets taken up in breakout age as well and average career production for me. So I guess there is a little bit of overlap, but yeah, that's a big one. Like, it matters a lot. It knocked down Olave a good bit in my model last year. I think he was the wide receiver 4 for me last year, so that was a little bit of a miss. Devontae, I had him fairly high still because his other metrics were just so outstanding that it kind of overrode. So that's what I like about the I guess the expansiveness of the models that I use is that I guess he kind of still stood up a bit there. So it's not a death sentence to me,
Right.
whereas a lot of people do treat it that way.
But I mean, if you look at the sample size of senior players that are going the first round versus the a couple presentations, and it's ugly. It's a big
deal.
Yeah, but
right.
I think something that's really interesting is this year specifically, I've learned to adjust in the sense of I'll use my model as a great guide, and I'll let people know this is how my model scored them, right? But after looking at guys like Wandell, I'm like, I need to adjust and be able to say, yeah, this guy scored really well, and he's got the potential to be really good, but let's be realistic, he would be an anomaly, right? And so I think that we need to have, and I try and approach this as objectively as possible. I have no film grades in there because I believe that's an objective or a subjective process. Now, when you talk about Lance Zierlein, you're not the first data analyst I've heard use his grades. And so that makes me think, man, do I want to add something like that where I'm throwing in an opinion piece? But I just think it's interesting trying to say, like Devontae Smith scored 8th in my model, but I should have, or not Devontae, let's use Chris Olave because that's a better example. I should know that he should have came out as a junior. He still got the same type of draft capital. I should have just gave him that. In hindsight, that's obviously like more obvious now, but my rankings aren't specific to my model. My model is like my template. It says, hey, these are good players. So it kind of helps me understand, like, all right, versus ADP, this is the type of guy I want to either stay away from, or here I definitely am firing away a pick. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense for the most part. I treat mine, pretty hardcore. And I heard some Wandale Robinson slander in there that I have to.
Dude, Wandale scored 99th percentile in my model, but he's not a 99th percentile wide receiver. So it's like, okay, well, now what?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you see that, and I know. So I'm like, well, I'm not picking him over Drake London or, those.
No, not that high for me. But yeah, my whole argument is if he was an inch or two taller to beat all those thresholds that Marcus Mosher and those guys were spitting out, that he'd be like, an easy mid first round pick based on his profile otherwise. So like you said,
I do like Wandale. I'm a Kentucky fan. I love him.
Oh, good.
But
cool.
I think Wandale's the kind of guy where we're getting some perspective from Film Bros helps too, right? Because Wandale was not a polished wide receiver. He was a super compiler in college, and he was good at some things, but he wasn't a good route runner. He wasn't really a fully fleshed out wide receiver. A really limited route tree. Mostly was working in, short area. So I think it's really useful for me to get some context on that. Just like you're saying, right? Like the numbers say what the numbers say, but sometimes stepping back and applying common sense can help.
Yeah. I think a lot of there's some data analysts that don't do that. But I also make the argument that I think also a lot of times people love to add narratives when they shouldn't. Like,
oh, for sure.
We can talk about Kenneth Walker because he had no receiving profile, right? And it's like, okay, they don't do that at Michigan State. Well, maybe, but couldn't you say the same thing about every single player that's lacking whatever skill set you want? Roshan Johnson's a good one. Well, Roshan played behind Bijan and Keontae, whatever his last name is. And I'm like, okay, so how's that a good thing? Like, there's no you saying that he's playing behind two players should not make you value him more. Like, I don't know. It's just a weird concept. And so it's like, yeah, you can add context and say, well, if Roshan Johnson gets decent draft cap and he's there in the third or fourth, yeah, fire away. But if you're taking Roshan Johnson as your third running back off the board because you think he's good, I think, in my opinion, that's very not smart.
the 1QB Nerds draft that's out right now, one of our teammates took him at like 6 or 7 overall, which I'm like, it's a little rich for me, man. He's not there for me, which I think that's going to be a big analyst versus like vibes film guy divide this year, right?
Most film guys don't have him that high, so I don't know.
No, that was extreme. Somebody is either hot taking it or is in full bloom love there. But
well, he does have a unique profile with his weight in a very light class. So I mean, there's things about everybody that stick out, but like you said, it's just applying the right context and knowing what to believe on the narratives.
So what is the right context? Because you can do this with anybody, you know.
Well, yeah, I wanted to find something that was just quantifiable. I'm also using the NFL.com grades. They're accessible. They come out early, and there's some kind of like quantifiable scale. Whether or not I agree with them, there's some of them I had a hard time swallowing. Like he didn't really like JSN very much, and I did a bunch of homework, and I like JSN a lot more than that. So I had a hard time not modifying that. I did tweak it in my model, and I would love to do my own film grades. That's just another whole thing to do.
So you've been mentioning that for a few years now, right? Because I remember being in your DMs searching for your film scores so I could track them.
Well, and then I started trying to compare player A against player B and realized oh shit, this is a lot harder than I thought it was. Right?
Yeah, I can't imagine something
I could never do it. But putting it in context is extremely hard.
I'll say this is
some kind of substructure.
This is one of the ways I approach that. So before I run any data, I go watch film on all the top 10 guys, quote unquote, and I rank them. And first off, when I say I watch film, I'm watching highlights, right? But I think that you can actually learn a lot more from highlights than people realize. First off, turn off the volume so you don't get hyped from the music, and second, is the guy running through gaping holes or his highlights him creating space? I think there's lots of things. So if the best plays that player X has is his O-line at a 10-foot gap, he ran and scored a touchdown 75 yards. That's not a highlight in my opinion, because who couldn't do that at the NFL or college level, right? So that's personally the way I like to approach that. So I do top 10 at each position just based on that. I think it's a good guide. Like the top 2 guys this year for running backs are like Bijan and Jameer. They both were, when I watched film, were like that. So I thought that was interesting.
So you watch film, but you don't use any other person's film grades or metrics?
I don't even use my grades. It's just it's more of a reflection. So I say, okay, so I guess I grade them 1 through 10, right? Top 10. Who do I think the best?
Still counts. Yeah.
I give some type of attribute, and then when I go run my model, if they correlate, I'm outstanding. This is probably really good. And for the most part, they usually do, which is so interesting to me because the people love the film versus analytics. In my experience, they're almost always very similar. I'm not watching film and seeing a guy who's the 10th ranked receiver thinking, "Oh, this dude's better than Jamar Chase."
You get the couple outliers every year, right?
There's always some.
Last year it was Rashad White, right? I think for a lot of people, a lot of the film guys didn't love him that much. The highlights were awesome. Yeah, but he was a big one for me. So I think we could spend 3 hours on any one part of this. If the three of us, we clearly all got the love for this stuff, which is awesome. But let's try to hone in a little bit, get some actionable content out there for the guys. So wide receivers, this class, who were you guys high or low on? Who did your models more or less? Without giving away the secret sauce, maybe a guy at the top that you prefer. I already know what Dave is going to. That's a wide receiver, and a sleeper that you are higher on, and then maybe one guy that you're lower on than other people. Dave, you want to lead in?
Sure. So obviously, Quentin Johnston really pops for me. I use per game stats.
You are the QBJ guy at this point.
Oh God, I can't stand the slander out there. I get that he does body catches and has some drops, but you've proven, the drops don't matter that much or at all, really. From anything I've found or been able to study. So I don't know what people are talking there. He's got really good film grades from Zerline and Scouts. I know the Nerds score. There's rumors that they're going to be a little low on him, which concerns me a little bit, but his profile is rock solid to me. He's produced every year. He's led his team every year. And that was even with missing games. It's just incredible in my opinion. So I think he's the real deal. And If he goes early enough, he'll be in contention for my wide receiver 1 overall. You want me to go through all 3, or do you want to bounce back?
Yeah,
back
let's bounce
and forth?
back. Jake, how about you?
Okay.
Who are you high on in the wide receiver position?
Okay, so I don't want to give away too much. So it took me a second to figure out how I want to go approach this. But I'll just say my number 1 receiver is Jordan Addison, and that is not consensus. But I really was impressed. I think he's a sharp rounder. He really reminded me of Deontay Johnson when I watched him. I thought he was very crisp. He was very fluid. Great hands. It was just so much I liked about him. He's a small, undersized guy. I'm not trying to do another Wandale here, but Jordan Addison was more productive than Wandale was. So, yeah, I mean, his career average receptions per team pass attempt is like 15%, which is a very, very solid number there. He's an early declare. And he's at least the last time I checked, he was projected late first. So that may change, and that'll change his grade. And it could shift somebody else up into that number 1 position.
Seen a couple mocks recently that have him falling out of the first to 34 in one and later in another. So it'll be interesting. And then you got guys like Daniel Jeremiah that got him top 10 overall players in the draft. So I think he has a wider range than Johnston.
But even if he goes
Jeremiah
34th,
a lot more than those
he would
other
still be
guys.
my number 1 receiver. So I think he's pretty locked in.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's the top wide receiver in my model too, depending. I had a couple different variations of it. One of them did like QJ more. After David and I had a conversation about adjusting or using
per game
games played stats.
Give me 2
right?
seconds, fellas.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that honestly bumped QJ up a hair above Addison. After film grades and DC for me, it does like JSN, but that was also me. That was the one thing I told you. I didn't like Zerline's take on him. I bumped his grade up in my models because I'm convinced that from watching film with film analysts that he is extremely talented. So, but that's
so your personal film grade on him was pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
It's so wide ranging, man. But there's a lot of slander out there for him that I'm like you said, it's just stats that don't really matter, and people are blowing it way out of proportion.
Yeah. And we could probably do an episode just on QJ. So how about a sleeper for you, David, that popped?
How deep you want to go? Like outside of top?
Outside of the top,
outside top 10.
Outside top 10 the position, or out, not a second round pick right now, an ADP.
Okay, let's see.
Third round rookie pick right now, I'd say sleeper, right?
Where's Cedric Tillman going?
I don't think third round's a sleeper this class. I think we legitimately have 3 solid rounds of fantasy players.
Oh, I love the second and third round. That's I have an article that I'm writing. I'm like,
had there.
Man,
I've seen Tillman fall to the late third, and I've seen him go at 202 in drafts that matter, like actual money drafts.
I guess I'll pick him then because he's my highest exposure underdog guy right now before the draft because I think he'll go higher than what people were initially expecting. But I do weigh physical measurements. I don't weigh athletic testing for wide receivers. I found athletic testing is a lot of noise, and we don't get as much as we used to. Like 3-cone used to be pretty good for wide receivers, but like hardly anyone does it now. And the times you do get are from pro days, and you don't know if they're accurate and stuff like that. So I've X'd athletic testing, but he's got those beautiful long arms and big hands too. And every time I see someone with over a 10 in my physical metric equation, it just reminds me of AJ Green or Larry Fitzgerald streaking down the sideline, catching contested balls. So I like his production per game a lot too. Like I was just talking with Jacob Sanderson on this in a Twitter commentary that you show his season long for his final year, and it looks real bad. But I mean, he got hurt. He only played 4 games, and his per game still really popped out. Like there's a lot of times he was better than Jalen Hyatt. So he's one of the few guys with the X body types. He's got production back it up. He's very late declare, so I know Jake won't like that one. Like I think he spent 5 years in college, but he didn't see the field those first 3 years really at all. And then he really burst onto the scene in my mind. So that's probably another good context one for guys that have popped late that I like, and I don't normally stand for those guys, but he's really looking nice in my models anyway.
I like Tillman from a film basis. My model has him
Nice.
buried, and I don't even care about early declare as much as you guys. I think I catch a lot of that with average production, right? Because if you didn't produce early, your average production sucks. But just the fact that he did nothing for 3 years, it's like, and he was playing behind Velas Jones, you know what I mean? It's not like he was Brian Ford like Tillman. What's up? We got some comments. All right, Jake, how about you? What's a sleeper that caught your eye, the position?
Parker Washington.
I love Parker. My model hates him, but I love him.
He's a slot guy. He's an early declare. He's a big slot guy. Great after the catch. In a class with a lot of undersized receivers, if he gets some decent draft capital, I think he's a guy that could be a sneaky fantasy producer.
Nice. So do both you guys care about measurables for wide receivers in an analytical sense, or are you just using it more in like an anecdotal sense, Jake?
I like big receivers. My model doesn't give a shit. So sorry.
Yeah,
I don't know if everything's okay or if it's permitted on here. So just let me know and I can chill on that.
I have a trucker mount, so
Okay.
No, it's the lowest correlation or the lowest weighted metric in my model. So yeah, it's pretty low. But
I guess the way I look at it is if I have two players that are scoring the same in my model and one's $160 and one's 220, I'm taking the guy that's 220.
Yeah.
Okay. Weight's a big one for you as opposed to
I like the big boys.
And...
Yeah, I feel like the smaller guys a little more fragile unless they're insanely quick. Tyreek Hill type. That's different for me.
Okay. No, that seems fair. That tracks with the injury history. So
yeah.
All right, so we're clearly not going to get through everything, but let's talk about RB models a little bit. I think we got most of the bigger process stuff out of the way already, so that's awesome. So I guess Jake, you want to lead off? Just what inputs interest you for running back?
So for running backs, I care about draft capital again. That's pretty much across the board. Now this is a weird one. A lot of people don't care about this. It pops in my model, and it helped me identify Rachaad White last year. It's career average receiving touchdowns per game played. So not only do they care about catching the ball, but they want you catching touchdown passes.
It's a very specific stat there.
I'm telling you, dude. I got all the.
What was it again? Career receiving touchdowns.
Career average receiving touchdowns per game played.
Okay.
Yeah, so it took me a while. That one actually, Dave removed it because he's like, "Yeah, I don't think anybody uses it." I was like, it matters for me, so I need it. So I ended up having to do the math to figure that one out myself this year. And then career average yards per team attempt. That's one across the board. So those are three metrics I care about with running backs.
Do you guys use weighted yards per team attempt or unadjusted?
I do not.
Yeah,
I adjust mine for SRS for production.
So
I use SOS for some other things, but
so that's something I keep in mind in general. Like if I had Rachaad White outscoring Kenneth Walker, it's like, well, yeah, he catches the ball, but Michigan State's a little bit different than South Dakota State, So it's like you gotta have context. But yeah, I mean that might be a way to do it. I kind of like that idea, because I wasn't doing adjusted, I was just measuring SRS and SOS, but weighted, that makes a lot of sense. I might have tried that. You might have just inspired me to do way more work than I want to do. So thanks.
Yeah, I want to go look for that too.
I need to give a hat tip to Hayden Winks for that one. He's the one that turned me onto it 3 years ago, I think, in an article of his. I'm like, well, so what's that? What do you do with it? And then he explained all of it. I'm like, holy shit. Popped it in, and it really livened up my models really good.
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. So how about you, David? What metrics do you care about for running backs?
So yeah, draft capital, production, again, adjusted for conference and SRS and stuff like that. I lean pretty heavily into the receiving rushing split, like the percentage of their total yards that came from receiving versus rushing. That's one that Antonio Gibson really popped in because he was, essentially a wide receiver hybrid running back, right? So that bumped him up a lot, and it paid off along with his athletic testing and stuff like that. And then I use an athleticism score that, again, is 3 models into one. So the way I measure athleticism is different than a lot of people. They see the combine, they call that athleticism. For me, I need football athleticism. So that means being used in a variety of ways, whether it's special teams, receiving, rushing, broken tackles. That's an athletic trait, right? A football athletic trait. So that goes into the athleticism score. And then, of course, combine testing goes into it.
So let me ask you this. How do you, what kind of metric or what kind of number do you assign to that? Like, is it whenever you're testing athleticism? I think it makes sense to be like, yeah, this guy, okay, so like, I'm going to go back to Roshan Johnson. Roshan Johnson's really good. He's just buried on the depth chart. Well, if he's that good, they're going to get him on the field some way, right? So say he's returning punts or, shotgun.
Yeah, let me
how do you measure that, or how do you score that?
So you could do how many times, they return, just simply are out there for it, or yards. And I know people do it a lot of different ways, or big plays. I know Matt Spencer was the guy who kind of started that, and that's what led him to Kadarius Toney, kind of highlighting in his model. But yeah, Roshan, because he saw so little playing time, like it really, really dings his stats really hard.
Yeah.
His broken tackle rate is best in class, so that bumps him a lot. His is even higher than Bijan, so that's a huge deal. But yeah, his testing was not great for the combine, so that brings him back down. But he is heavy, so that helps him a little bit. And then the split stats is pretty in between there, so he gets like you said, it's hard to fully measure a guy that doesn't see the field. So his production score is really low, obviously.
I'd say it's probably easier to have a higher broken tackle rate when you're fresh as hell in 220.
I would agree.
Yeah.
But yeah, like his profile doesn't pop out big, but it's just one of the many things. So like that's what I love about this running back class. There's like a flavor for everything, right? You got Deuce Vaughn, the undersized super producer. You got Roshan, the big guy who didn't see the field but he can break tackles, and a lot of scouts like his profile and stuff like that. And you got Kenny McIntosh, who was just miserable athletic testing, but was an awesome receiver, and they used him on routes and on the championship team. So his SRS is really high, and he helped them win. Like he wasn't doing nothing out there. So I'm really curious where he goes. Before the testing, I had him as a round 3 projected capital, but after that,
D3
brutal.
But I think he's the kind of guy that I think will have a role because he's a specialist and he's extremely good at a couple of things.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Brian Ford, I'm sure you guys know him as. How do you guys settle on a model you're satisfied with? Hit rates over 1, 2, 3 years, or would have to hit on past guys before you build? Brian, we talked about this a little bit earlier too, just about back testing a model. And these guys, Jake, do you want to give them a succinct answer for that?
Yeah, so I don't want to get back into to fitting again, but I mean it's a good example just to like compare. So last year, I have rankings, right? And I'm like, okay, well, how did those rookies finish? Assuming they stayed on the field and had an opportunity. Brees was obviously outstanding. He got hurt, so I feel great that he was my running back 1. Kenneth Walker was my RB3 instead of 2. I'm like, yeah, he was really good, but maybe I should have kept in mind that Rachaad White was playing in a different context or a conference. Sorry, different. What is it? FCS versus FBS. So that's something
White's
that
Arizona. He's just a G5 school. Or no, he's G5. He's Pac-12.
No, he was South Dakota State.
Rachaad White played at Arizona State.
I think not at the beginning of his career. I think he transferred.
He did. He was JUCO, and he came up.
Yeah, that's what it was.
So I just didn't even look at his JUCO stuff.
Yeah, we figured it out. We got there. But see, I look at career average, so I have to be able to figure that out too, which is fun trying to finesse that. But anyways, Brian, to answer your question, basically you look at how it ranks players and then compare them. So like I can just look at last year's rankings and say, yeah, overall these are pretty damn sharp, and we're going to run it back. Or you can say, wow, that wasn't what I wanted to be. I got to figure out how to fine tune this and improve this process.
Yeah, Jake, Dave, do you want to chime on that at all?
Yeah, in the simplest terms, it's just an R² of your predictive model versus NFL points per game.
So, they don't know what that means.
Yeah. Well, R² correlation. How well your model fits the data.
Yeah.
That's it. So, all right. So I think we got 5 minutes left of Mr. Jake before he has to go eat some food. So let's play the game with the running back position. And you guys each give us one that you're high on, or low on out of the top guys, and then a sleeper. You want to lead this time, Jake?
Yeah, sure. So I'm very high on Jameer. Okay, and I know a lot of people are high on him. Most people don't have him lower than RB3. I kind of got some flack on the internet for saying Jameer Gibbs is much closer to Bijan Robinson in this class than whoever the hell you have as your RB3. Jameer Gibbs was so productive in college. I mean, he led his team in receptions as a running back. That is insane. And then the guy that I want to give for value, I'm not going to share him. I really like Keaton Mitchell as a late round grab. We're talking 5th round, but
yeah,
he was a really fast guy out of East Carolina. He looks really explosive. I don't know how his O-line was, but I did go watch some actual film on him, and I thought he looked solid. And I'm thinking a guy running that fast might get some. I can't help but think Chris Johnson when I see a speedster out of East Carolina, but he's not Chris Johnson. I'm not saying that. But yeah, it's a guy that I'm good gambling on in the 5th.
Yeah, I hope he gets drafted.
I think he will.
drafted at all. Yeah, there's just a lot of little guys. There's a lot of guys with that profile in this class, you know. So they're probably even more devalued, and the NFL doesn't usually value them very much. But I'm with you. I like Mitchell as well.
4-3-7. We love that.
Yeah. How about you, David?
I like Zach Charbonnet or Charbonnet, however you say it over there. I like his size. He's got a very well-rounded profile. I think he's very close to Gibbs for me. He's definitely behind him, but he's very close. So he's going to be
closer to Charbonnet than he is Bijan for you.
Definitely, yeah. I have Bijan as one of the best prospects in my database almost. So.
I just have Jameer there as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, his receiving pops, hard. So I'm a little concerned about his 3-down usage. Obviously fast, incredible receiver. His broken tackle rate was actually pretty impressive for what he does. So that's I obviously couldn't use him though. You took him, so I gotta go with Sharp next. But as far as a sleeper, I kind of hit him on a little bit, but I like Deuce Vaughn a lot. I know he's tiny, but there's nobody that's had his profile at his size. His production is outstanding at that level.
It's just Wandell in 2023.
I love my little guys.
Yeah.
I love my little guys. I don't. Everyone can hate on him. I'll
when
keep
they're that
sneaking on my
productive
guy.
at top schools, it's just like that's not necessarily top school. But when they're that productive, it's just like, man, it's hard to overlook that.
Yeah, he had
SEC too, right?
No, Kansas State.
Okay, it's Big 10, Big 12.
Yeah, I think it's Big 10.
Yeah, he had a 16.2 SRS for reference, and Bijan was at 15.9 SRS just for reference.
Very similar.
So, and their strength of schedule was extremely similar, almost identical as far as rating. So, yeah, just truly impressive. Like I know he's tiny. I know that's not great.
160 or 170, right?
Yeah. So I just hope someone can find a way to use him. And I know he's been training with Darren Sproles and stuff like that to get his usage on special team. But he's going to be definitely a late round target of mine.
Yeah, he's a guy that before I started with film score adjustments and draft capital, he was like 3rd or 4th in the model.
Yeah, just
like
pops.
Right
pops in those days. Right. How about your guys? We haven't got much of your takes over here.
Yeah.
Well, the 50 people that watch this show get my takes every week. You guys are the interesting ones. I mean, honestly, I'm like the anti-hot take machine, and I feel like my model is kind of like really similar to each year. It's like Charbonnet was super high on before film grades and draft capital brought Gibbs above him. Charbonnet was above him, but after those adjustments, they had him up here. The guy that the raw model was super high on, so I guess this is the interesting guy for me, is Sean Tucker. Just his production and his athleticism are both excellent. But the problem for me
people
is that,
say him, and he just doesn't pop at all. What stands out for him specifically in your guys' model?
Well, for me, it was just raw production, right? I do use like that, like average, just yards and raw production stats, weighted not that much, but he hits pretty hard in those, and he was fairly efficient up until this year. Like last year, 2021, he was efficient, and then receiving like raw usage, he was on for a lot of snaps and had a lot of production. Not super efficient though. Yards per route run, a little bit weak. But what did you like about him, Jake?
Same thing. You guys know what I care about. It's just his career average receiving touchdowns per game played and his career average yards per team yards per team attempt. He scores well in both of those. His draft cap's not great for what I have projected, so draft cap's going to tell me a lot about how I'm going to have him ranked in my RB class.
Yeah,
but I like him.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you guys this. This is my I'm on the fence on this guy. I'm a fan, but I don't know what to make of him. Kendry Miller. Did you guys love or hate?
He's a little lower in mine. I love his broken tackle rate. That stands out really well. His production from a receiving end is really lacking in mine. I don't like that he didn't test. I know he was hurt with a hamstring injury or something like that, right? So, athletic testing carries a decent amount of weight in my model. And when you don't have much to go with, he just gets, an average rate for the most part. So that one's a little concerning. The film scores I use for him are pretty tough. But a lot of these running backs for me are going to be landing spot heavy dependent because they're so close after, A-chain for me. I got a lot of guys within like a point per game.
See, that's like 3 through 11 for me outside of I can't really discuss.
Landing spot, draft capital.
And I grade landing spots too. So like Texans was an A+ last year where Pierce went. So I grade out how many points are being scored in their current backfields and how easy it'll be to overtake them. So
I'm glad you brought that up. Real quick before I bounce, I do want to make sure that I bring up something that I find a very interesting approach. So I don't care as much about landing spots until I'm looking at the third round of rookie drafts. You're looking at Tyler Algier, Dameon Pierce, both those guys, Ramondre Stevenson a couple years ago. All these guys landed in what I like to call ambiguous running back situations where the guy might not be that great, but he's going to get the opportunities. And if you get one of those guys that ends up starting, I don't believe Dameon Pierce is that good, but somebody in my league's going to, and so I'm going to flip him. So I paid a third for him. I'm easily going to get a second out of him, maybe a first if somebody's a real sucker. And boom, I'm flipping value. That's the name of the game for me.
I only have one question. Where the hell did you get Dameon Pierce in the third round? He was going at like 201 in my leagues.
302 was ADP last year.
That must have been pre-draft.
I think
early,
so.
Yeah. I don't know. Like he was going really high.
Post-draft.
No, his team was a first-round pick in all the leagues I did.
No way.
We must be different people here, Jake.
Late first. In every league I remember. I think that was
I played with a bunch of degenerates, so yeah.
I'm gonna go check. I'll see what it was.
No, I mean that's awesome if you did. Like you savaged it, but that's
I didn't get him. I had 303 and 34. He went right before. I was pissed. Him and Algier both.
Yeah.
Give me a second. All right, I'm tripping. You're right. Yeah, he was 12
Algier, though. Yeah, I mean, Algier, I was getting end of the second. I hit him there a lot.
Damn.
Yeah, so it's funny you mention all these guys. I had a B or higher grading so I grade things A through F in my scale. And I had an A+ for Pierce. I had an A for Algier and a B, I think, for Ramondre Stevenson, all for good landing spots. So it's funny it lines up with your ambiguous theory.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna do it again this year. I'm gonna continue to. I love that. I think it's a good strategy where it's like, all right, cool, model's good. And when you no longer have players that you find values, you're talking about Deuce Vaughn's being a good value this year. When you no longer see those values, it's like, well, I'm gonna take landing spot at this point because you can easily flip that. But that's crazy. I could have swore he was going 302. Maybe I'm just going crazy.
Yeah, you could argue he should have. You know what I mean? Just on the rest of his profile, but. All right, any parting shots from you, Jake? I mean, what my wrap? Obviously, I don't think unless you really want to hang for a while, David. I don't think we're gonna really get into QBs or tight ends. I'm down to hang if you are. But my wrap up notes were any advice you guys have to somebody that is trying to find a starting point, or how has this process changed for you over the past couple of years, Jake? If you want to close out on one of those.
Spot for you, and I assume you just mean Dynasty Fantasy Football. It's your first year playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. Is that correct?
Well, I'm just saying, like you're interested in data scouting. It seems useful to you. But you don't know shit about this. So,
either take a class on it, or find a guy on Twitter who knows what they're talking about. There's quite a few. I thought I was like, oh, I'm gonna get in here. I'm gonna be the only guy. There's so many of us doing this. And us three, we're doing it. You got Jacob Sanderson doing it. You got Bulletproof doing it. Tim Albatry. I play in a whole league with dudes who are doing the same thing as me. And I tell you though, it's the sharpest people that I play with. I can't get trades done because we all think the exact same way. We're all trying to capture that value. So yeah, just start following people. And a lot of people are happy to answer DMs. Shoot me any DM. The only ones I'm not going to answer, if you ask me who you should take at 102 or 103, I'm going to say, hey, I invested a lot of time, pay for my rookie rankings, happy to discuss. Other than that, though, I'm happy to share all kinds of information. And I'm sure that you two would both do the same.
Yeah, I'd say Jake was super helpful to me in fleshing out some of the more heavier statistical
we talked like
stuff.
An hour one night on the phone.
Yeah, absolutely. He was like, hey, call me, man. Let's talk this through. And he helped me understand p-tests and some of the more rigorous aspects of doing the regression. So that was awesome, man. I appreciate it. Very grateful.
Absolutely.
Let me coming on. You want me to boot you off?
Yeah, I'll bounce. Appreciate you guys having me. Really nice to seeing some faces here, and you guys share some things that I need to start taking into consideration. So you guys taught me something tonight, so that's good.
Yeah, awesome. Ditto here, and I hope you shred your competition, man.
Oh, we're gonna kill it.
Yeah, good luck.
All right, later, fellas. I'll see you guys around.
Take it easy.
Brother.
All right, bye.
So yeah, David, I don't know what's it look like for you. Do you want to get into quarterbacks? Do you want to just have a wrap up and go home?
Well, this is easy because I don't model quarterbacks, but no, I got kids' bedtime coming up real hot here. So
do you literally not model quarterbacks? Because I've heard other people say that there is no point. I've had decent results with it.
Really, I've tried twice now. I tried 4 or 5 years ago. Results were terrible. So like I always wait a year to publish results, right? I want to see how my models do before I send them out to people. I want to help you. I don't want to set you back. And then 2 years ago, I tried again with some stuff that Travis May showed me, and it was decent, but it still wasn't good enough. And I think that was probably the Zach Wilson year, or Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, right? They same year, and had turned out terrible again. So whoever can do it, God bless them. I can't. So if you got something good, you got to share that with the world, I think.
So mine's simple, and I don't think I'm reinventing the wheel, but it seems to be useful. You know what I mean? And it's I can look at what the exact inputs are for you and send them to you if you want. But EPA, I think, was really helpful for me.
So where do you get that?
So this might be a thing. So I pull my data set from Jarek McKee. Not Jarek McKee.
No, Jarek Backus or?
Yeah, Jarek Backus. I use Jarek Backus' set. And it's not the stuff from Campus to Canton, but he has his Devy data set, and it has all this stuff in it. It might be a slightly different slice than what you're looking at. That was what made it useful for me. Before that, it was utterly worthless. But EPA,
I've heard EPA a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm using touchdown interception ratio. I'm using, I think, a little bit of completion percentage, but not much. Okay. And then EPA significantly, and draft capital projected, maybe a couple other things, and conference adjustment as well. But this is
no rushing stuff.
A little bit of rushing, yeah. I've had it in and I've had it out as either.
Yeah, I've heard it's real noisy. The rushing part.
Yeah. So that's one of those things too. And I think this is an interesting philosophical discussion for us too. So I did 2 things this year that my model didn't love, but I thought made it more useful. Right. And I think the rushing for quarterbacks was one of them because it brought up some guys. And I know this is shit process, but it brought up some guys that were interesting that my model was otherwise missing, even though it didn't improve like R-squared value. Right. And then I did the same thing kind of for running backs. For me, at least for my data set, yards per route run with running backs didn't really have good p-value at all. But
yeah, I don't use that one either.
Yeah, but I liked the guys that it brought to the forefront because for me, and I think
it just highlighted them. You mean?
Yeah, highlight them. So you're doing a lot of stuff that I'm not. My model didn't love Stevenson that much. The yards per route run really made him pop more in the model, and the same thing with Gibbs and a couple other guys like that have been useful assets, and I didn't think it did any harm to other guys. So I was like, you know what? What's the saying? Like, all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And I was kind of like, hey, I mean, if it's not useful to me and it's telling me things that I obviously, don't jive with my intuitive understanding, then maybe I should try something else. But I mean, this one, and I think it's, it liked Hurts, it liked Herbert, Murray, loves Fields, likes Tua. It thinks Caleb Williams is going to be a top, 5 type prospect, likes Hooker in this class, which is interesting to me. And then Richardson with draft capital. This is kind of like the zone of like, you're not dead, but like it ain't great. Right? You're Kenny Pickett, you're Daniel Jones, right? So that's where like Levis and Jones are. Levis and Richardson are.
So let's do the litmus test. Where's Zach Wilson on this thing? I see him. There he is. Row 25 there.
Yeah, he's right in that. He's right in that range. So, and this is the average guys that had a top 12 season. So he was below.
No, it seems pretty good. Like it looks like it tracks just from a quick eye test, but I'd definitely be interested in discussing more sometime. But yeah, I got to bounce here though. I can hear my kids getting unruly.
Do what you got to do. You got time for a parting shot? Any words of wisdom for someone starting off on a data journey?
Peter Howard's database, or any of the ones we've mentioned in the show. He even has a page with his models that just show you how his model works. Like he's one of the most generous guys as far as fantasy knowledge that I've met. It helped me a lot starting out using his database, and you can see how everything works. Like you just got to spend the time in it to understand it a little bit. It feels like a massive hurdle right away, but it's worth it if you're going to get into it. That's a great first step. Don't copy them, obviously, but make it your own. But it's just a good kind of path to get started. So.
You know what? Toss Peter Howard a couple of bucks on his Patreon. Get his data set. That was also my entry point. I prefer this one for some other things now, but some of my sheets have a separate tab with his because there's stuff that's in there that's not in here that I love. And also, I'll say watching his videos and stuff, he's a great teacher of a lot of these concepts as well. So, David, I can't thank you enough. This was awesome. I had such a great time. Again, I think this could have been a 6-hour podcast, and we all would have been totally engaged the whole time. Everyone watching probably would have been dead.
No, I like how you brought up a visual here. Like in the future, if we ever do another one, it's nice to have the visual because people can see what you're talking about, and we can maybe zoom in on a model or something like that. And saying all these numbers and stuff only get you so far if you're a visual learner. So
yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I'll do a solo pod and kind of go through some of this stuff more. I had these queued the whole time, but we were kind of in the weeds in discussions, and I didn't feel like there was a time to throw them out, but maybe I dropped the ball.
No, sometimes it's too much for people and they just like listening too. So again, thanks for having me and really enjoyed going through this stuff.
I appreciate you so much. Thanks for taking time away from your family. Again, follow David on Twitter. Check out the Z-Score. Follow Jake. And we appreciate you all tuning in so much. Thank you, my